we've heard a lot of important material regarding the spread of the gospel and church planting, and I would like to dive in straight away. And I trust also, Michael, that you've been able to listen to what Stefan had to say, and the other way around, I think, was okay.
I can blame translation for everything that you didn't like.
Me too.
Yes, good.
Okay, I would like to start perhaps first. Is there an immediate burning question that one of you would like to ask the other? So, for example, Michael, is there something that you would like to ask Stefan?
I'm not going to put him on the hot seat. You can put me on the hot seat if he wants.
No.
That's fine.
Yeah. Or Stefan, any...
No, not really. I think there was a sort of warm bath that Michael offered. I recognize everything. I mean, yes, I think you really did justice to your father's work, and especially was him. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was interesting that you put the pietistic influences of Tim Keller right next to church planting. At first, it doesn't look like there's a lot of similarities because you're thinking, but actually, I think there's a lot of connectionalism that I think what we both were saying, if you could hear it, is the gospel as it changes you. You said this is your fourth point of the theological aspect of Tim Keller. If that moves you, you don't keep that to yourself. If it's really real, right, you want other people to understand that. And one of the best ways that Tim Keller did it was through church planting. So there's actually a lot of similarities that people always divorce the sociological of the plant, of trying to figure out analyzing the demographics, the statistics, and they want to put that apart from the theological of the heart change and the pietistic influence, and they actually go completely together. You can't have. I would say they're related. You can't have one without the other.
Yeah. I think it was interesting that you ended with that point, Stefan. Is that something maybe to enlarge on a little bit? Is your own experience as well?
Church planting in itself is not that difficult. You can explain it in 5 minutes. The point,
start a church.
Nothing to it, yeah. But the point is, of course, how you do this and what spirit you do it. And what I really liked and admired in Tim Keller's work, and I think it was quite unique in that, it is very strong theological, and I mean theological here, and not necessarily only in an intellectual way, but spiritual, theological / spiritual way in which he did it and went about it.
Yeah, that brings me to the point that, of course, you spoke a lot about the pietistic influence, about the key phrase that Tim used to explain the gospel, and you referred to that in the article of the two thieves, which is a bit similar. That's also something you can, Stefan, is that that theological point that Tim Keller made, and that he saw those two extremes and said, no, I offer the third way, the real way of the gospel in Christ. Is that something you recognize as important for the Dutch or the European context? Is that something we also use now and should use? And what's your perspective on that?
Yeah, sure, but if you don't mind, my answer is a bit longer now. So part of it, I would say, is gift-based. Keller was a great educator. So he knew how to balance positions and to try to take the best out of several positions he didn't necessarily share and bind them into a new synthesis and so on and so forth. What all great educators do, teachers. That was one part of it. The other part I've struggled with sometimes. Sometimes he came across to me as someone who was always looking for balance and doctrine, in the sense that we should always strike the balance of the Bible. And I did my PhD in the prophets in the Old Testament, and there are a lot of things, but not balanced. I was always thinking, what is the prophetic or the charismatic element in this? In the sense, sometimes you just have to forget about balance, just make the point. But then again, and that came recently across to me, actually after his passing away, I thought maybe he was, after all, a great prophet as well, because what I began with, the context in which he worked was extremely polarized. So maybe the prophetic thing to do in a context like that for Christians is to make peace. And he was great at doing that.
Yeah. Okay. Any response from you on that, Mike?
Well, and that's where I was going to go. Is that actually it's contextual? Like I was arguing that the phrase still works. The phrases of you don't obey to be accepted. You're accepted because that's why you obey. And the gospel is you're worse than you ever dared believe, but you're more loved than you ever dared hope. That worked there, and it's in balance. I mean, it's contextual. But I said at the end of my talk that there's a lot of different types of gospel presentations. There's Christus Victor. There's kingdom, restoration and fulfillment. And depending on the context, you're going to need to emphasize. It's still a gospel. It's still the truth. But for New York City, for where he was at and who he was himself, right? He's contextual too. His own personality. That's the way that it came out, and the Holy Spirit used it effectively. So that's where I wanted to go. Is it just it's contextual?
Yeah, absolutely.
To who he was and where it was, and that's why it worked. I still think there's value, but maybe not in every context. Now, I don't know if you're planting a church among Muslims. I'm not sure if the best way is to do it the Tim Keller way, because he wasn't planting his church among Muslims. He planted among pseudo-secular, psychologically minded individualists, New Yorkers at the time.
Yeah. Okay, let's move on maybe to church planting. Stefan made a point that when you look at the background...
Sorry if I interrupt you, but just to follow up on what Michael said.
Fine.
So that means it's not a model, it's not a blueprint, it's contextual. So what we can learn a lot from Tim Keller if you're a church planter in the Netherlands, but you should never copy the model.
Right.
Unless you're in New York.
Or the person. It's actually in the I don't know if you had that over here. Sorry. In the States, there was What Would Jesus Do? WWJD.
Right.
Yeah.
And the problem with that is sometimes Jesus would walk through a wall. Yeah. Sometimes Jesus would.
Exactly.
It's not. It doesn't work. So what would Tim Keller do? I mean, you shouldn't. Tim Keller. No. In this area, he sinned. You can't think that way. That's why contextual is the way to go.
Yeah. I think that's why he was also rather, if I remember correctly, when he was at the conference in Berlin, I think you remember that probably, Stefan, that he said, be careful not to copy what I've done actually.
He always discouraged that, absolutely,
yeah. Okay, let's maybe move on a little bit to church planting, a bit further about church planting. Stefan, you said that when you look at the sources in Puritanism and Neo-Calvinism, etc., from those sources, you don't necessarily get a theology of church planting.
You can make one.
And you get it from somewhere else, of course. You touched upon the different sources. Is that what you recognize, Michael? How would you respond to that?
Yeah, it was an interesting point about evangelism is not necessarily connected. You have to be careful. How do you keep them together? Do you pull them apart? And again, I would say contextual as well. Like, where are you planting? Are you planting among, people who all say they're Christians? I mean, in the South of America, everybody one of the reasons I wouldn't want to do ministry there is you have to convince people they're not Christians before you can tell them what it means to be a Christian. That's just a very different place of how you would go about evangelism and church planting. But I think it's contextual in that sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I was a bit curious also about the relationship between evangelism and church planting. Yeah, like you said, well, perhaps we should not use church planting as a means for evangelism. At the same time, it can work like that, actually. It depends a little bit, perhaps, or how you do it. And it also relates back to the fact that you said, what you get in some case of church planting, we've seen it in the Netherlands, that you collect a lot of Christians from other backgrounds, actually, rather than newly converts. That's well known and well established, of course. Yeah. Your own work has established that. I wonder, in that case, comparing it to Redeemer, in fact, how to Redeemer? Right. To what extent were those people? Was it also a matter of collecting Christians that had already some Christian affiliation?
I don't know.
Or was it newcomers, entirely new to the faith? On the other hand, you had perhaps maybe these kind of professionals who may have had a vague Christian background, thought they were Christians based on the idea of some sort of performance, or how would you respond to that, Michael?
Well, I want to hear first about the first part of the question.
Yeah, the evangelism and church.
Let's first unpack that a bit.
To put it in
the
polarized way.
demographics.
Is one a means to the other or the other way around?
Yeah, I want to hear first.
Yeah, it's not, yeah. So I'm not actually there contesting what Keller said. That's much more Peter Wagner kind of stuff. So the idea that church planting is the best instrument of evangelism under heaven, all that, I don't buy that.
No.
I don't think the church is an instrument to begin with, an instrument for anything.
That's old church growth. See Peter Wagner. Yeah,
right.
He was very sociological about it.
He was.
Yeah.
Certainly. So, but the point is, historically, I'd say it's pretty healthy to just keep this threefold structure: evangelism, gathering, and planting.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that you necessarily have to go through all these stages constantly, or that it's a dogmatic thing.
No.
But I mean, to keep in mind that it's always about the gospel and about evangelism and about spreading the gospel, regardless of whether a church is involved in the first stages or not. Usually there is. I mean, there is at least a community of Christians or some presence, communal presence of Christians, especially in pioneer areas, obviously. But my point is, the church should not be instrumentalized. Also, because in a more secularizing society, there is also a real danger there that basically people forget about evangelism. They just think, if I plant a church, I've learned somewhere or read somewhere that then the non-Christians will flock in.
Yeah.
Nah, they won't.
No, they won't. No. No, I've seen a few instances of churches being planted where the members at least say they are personally motivated for evangelism. And that...
Sure, that's often a reason, of course.
Yeah.
So I'm not trying to do dogmatics here.
No.
You should be very... Just to keep in mind...
But to keep in mind these different functions.
Yeah.
In my circles, we always say you can't be the church unless you're doing three things: worship, community, and mission.
Right.
Yeah. If you're not doing those three things, you're not a church. And I think, I actually remember my dad one time, he was reading the late, Pope John Paul. He wrote a small treatise on...
Evangelii Gaudium?
Yeah, about the 5 things that to be a church. There's dogma, discipleship, evangelism, justice, and community. And if you're not doing those things, I condense it to 3, right? Worship, community, and mission. Inside mission, you have evangelism and justice. You also have church planting. If you're not doing those things, you can't be actually the church. And I think a lot of times the tyranny of the immediate, which is I just got to put on something for Sunday, pushes out the important, which is the full aspect of what it means to live out the Great Commission. So I agree with Stefan.
Okay, But, maybe one final question is to talk about this reason for church planting that sometimes people do because of dogmatic reasons, because they disagree with all other churches in the area, and they think that they should be sufficiently different.
If they have studied it at all.
That
basically it's just routine.
I like to say church splits is basically church planting, but because I don't like them.
That's a positive spin.
Yeah, it's a positive spin of, it's a joke.
I was wondering, in fact, did you have to deal with that issue in New York, Michael?
Is that, church splits, are always an issue, but I think what Stefan's pointed out is that there is intentional or unintentional church planting. Intentional is studying. I never really fully read the Center Church, but I think you
didn't read Center Church?
Not fully, no. Don't ask me which books I have read and haven't. But in there, there's a lot of stuff about you need to look at your population, demographic. That's intentional. I don't think you're always intentional, and I think it's also hard, right? We're limited. You need to get something started.
I'm just not just talking about splits, also talk about denominations. But maybe that I'm not sure how that feels in the United States, but for many Christians here in Europe, at least, it would still feel as if the fact that there are so many denominations is somehow a sin. It's maybe inevitable, and at some point you have to get used to it, but it's not what Christ taught us.
No.
So the fact that you're just a church-planting denomination without even giving it a thought, that there may be other ways to do mission rather than just planting churches of your own brand, is, I think, a sad
I think it's
thing.
hard for a Christian to say, I believe this is true. I think this is the best distillation of the gospel that I know of, and yet I also am at the same time okay that when I plant a church, I'm not going to be able to effectively meet everyone at the same place. And whole denominations meet individual particularities, emotional sensibilities. differently than I can, and able to hold those things together. I can hold the view that I think I'm right, but I also want to be exclusive to say that doesn't mean other people can't be met in other denominations and other spaces. And holding those things together, I think, is really important for the unity and diversity.
What you're giving now is a healthy, pragmatic reason, I think. You can't be all things for all people at the same time. That's true,
That's
of
true.
course.
Yeah. But at the same time, if you maintain mutual relationship and the recognition of respect one another and even work together where you can across denominations, around the same gospel, that is what is key to what we're trying to do with the Gospel Coalition. That's
sure.
Okay. Maybe one final comment, each one of you, Michael. Any final comment before we finish and go to break?
Just to answer the other half of the question about Redeemer, when it first started, I was pretty young, but what I was told is that there was this a lot of conversions were happening. A lot of times it was people who were being met in college ministries, but they hadn't actually been in part of a church. And so they come to a church and they heard it. I think as the church got bigger, it attracted more people. This is pretty common when it becomes an attractional church. And then you attracted more people who might have grown up in the church. But those people thought, again, the first point from Edwards, which is people thought they were justified because they were sanctified. I think when they realized that wasn't actually Christianity, there was almost a renewed sense in their life. So there was almost like a conversion, reconversion, whatever you want to call it. So then that was sort of a second phase. So I think you actually had both non-Christians becoming Christians, but a lot of Christians being reconfirmed in their faith originally.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Stefan, any final comment?
No, I think. No, that's good.
It's feeling pretty good.
That's good. Yeah. Right, both of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Very illuminating because certainly in the Netherlands there is still all kind of activities going on, evangelism and church planting sometimes, and we need to learn from these sort of things. So thank you very much for all your wisdom and insights.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.